Under my most favored nation policy for drug prices, the cost of prescription drugs is coming down by up to 90%, depending on the way you calculate. You could also say 5, 6, 7, 800%.
No, you cannot say that. It is impossible for a price to come down more than 100%. When a price comes down 100%, Donald, we're going to say this again, the price becomes zero. There is no price below zero, Donald. Imagine how many times his teachers tried to tell him that. But Donald Trump, alone in that room today, is the only person there who doesn't know that. He doesn't know that arithmetic, that basic arithmetic. Donald Trump is the only graduate of the University of Pennsylvania who does not know that a price cannot come down more than 100%. Everyone at the University of Pennsylvania knew that. In 1749, when Benjamin Franklin established the University of Pennsylvania.
So one of the biggest things that I've done is the fact that we have now most favored nation. We will pay whatever the lowest price is in the entire world. So our drug prices are going to be coming down by staggering 90%. Again, you could say 1,000%, 2,000%.
Donald Trump fails an intelligence test every time he speaks publicly, every single time. And he did again today. There is no most favored nation plan for American drug prices. Donald Trump claims there is and issued an announcement, just an announcement last year, claiming he has agreements, secret agreements, with pharmaceutical companies to charge Americans whatever is the lowest paid price in the world for any drug. Not one word of that agreement has been made public, and not one drug price has declined in America because of it. Donald Trump then proved that he doesn't understand how most favored nation pricing would work if it did exist for American pharmaceutical consumers. Donald Trump stupidly believes that the way for the United States to pay the lowest price in the world for drugs is for other countries to raise the price of their drugs. That is not how it's supposed to work. The only thing that is supposed to happen is that the high price is supposed to go down to the lowest price, which is supposed to stay where it is. But Donald Trump isn't even pretending that he can even understand what his plan is supposed to do. Because he doesn't understand what his non-plan is supposed to do, he made up a conversation with the president of France in which he forced the president of France to raise drug prices in France, something no politician would ever do. And oh, by the way, something that is impossible for the president of France to do. But Donald Trump, in his publicly disintegrating brain today, believed that he found the way to sound tough about something.
So when I called up Emmanuel Macron, I watched him yesterday with those beautiful sunglasses. What the hell happened? But I watched him sort of be tough. But he was at $10 for a pill. And I said, Emmanuel, and I have all the big pharmaceutical companies are in total agreement. It wasn't easy, by the way. They're tough, smart. They've been getting away with the scam for a long time. But they gave it up. But they said, you'll never get the countries to approve it. I said, why is that? Because they won't. They always said, we're not paying any more. Get the rest for the United States. So over the years, they stayed the same. We just went up, up, up. And I mean, we would pay 13, 14, 15 times more than some certain countries would. So I said, no, they'll approve it 100%. Sir, you'll never get them to approve it. I said, I guarantee you.
Okay, pardon me. I really don't want to interrupt him in mid-hallucination, but Donald Trump has no idea that socialists like Bernie Sanders have been trying to control the price of prescription drugs in America for all of Donald Trump's lifetime. And Republicans have said, absolutely not, must not do that. Donald Trump doesn't know that the more socialistic countries of Europe and virtually every country in the world controls drug prices. Their governments control the price. They set the price and control it. And that's why the drug prices are low in those countries. Democrats have done everything they can over decades in legislation to try to control drug prices and have been opposed by Republicans every single step of the way. Joe Biden managed to have a major breakthrough on prescription drug prices for Medicare, forcing the pharmaceutical companies to negotiate their prices down by law. That's in law. But most drug prices still in this country don't come close to being regulated. And other Democratic presidents have also tried, and mostly failed, to get price regulation on drugs in this country, and every Republican in Congress and every Republican president has opposed that.
And I said, Emmanuel, you're going to have to lift the price of that pill to $20, maybe $30. Think of that. That means it's a doubling of prescription drugs. Might be a tripling, might be a quadrupling. It's not easy. No, Donald, I will not do that. I said, yes, you will, 100%. He said, no. You're asking me to double. I said, Emmanuel, you've been taking advantage of the United States for 30 years with prescription drugs. You really should do it, and you will do it. I have no doubt. In fact, I am 100% sure you're going to. No, I will not do it.
Everyone in that audience knows that he was hallucinating, and hallucinating a lot. So back to Donald Trump claiming he told the president of France that he would have to increase the French price of pharmaceuticals. Just imagine telling a politician anywhere, hey, I want you to raise the price of drugs in your country. That is an insane political proposition on its face. Here's the Trump version.
I said, Emmanuel, you're going to be doubling or tripling? No. I said, here's the story, Emmanuel. The answer is you're going to do it. You're going to do it fast. And if you don't, I'm putting a 25% tariff on everything that you sell into the United States and a 100% tariff on your wines and champagnes. And that's about 10 times more than what I'm requesting. And you're going to do it. I don't want to go public with it, but you may make me do that. No, Donald, I will do it. I will do it. It took me, on average, 3 minutes a country saying the same thing. You will do it. They all said, no, I will not do it. You're asking me to double the cost of prescription. I said, that's right, because you've been screwing us for 30 years. And they said, we will not do it. I said, that's all right. On Monday morning, we're putting a 25, 30, 50. I gave different numbers for different countries.
Donald Trump claims he wants the United States to have the lowest drug prices in the world, but at the same time, he claims he wants to raise the lowest drug price in the world. He wants France and other countries to raise their lower drug prices so that the United States only has to match a much higher lowest drug price. The man had absolutely no idea what he was saying 1 second of that lying hallucination. Had no idea what was coming out of his mouth. Those 3-minute deals he claims he made, just describing that one hallucination with the president of France took him more than 3 minutes. His ignorance is getting bigger. Knowledge is actually the antidote to ignorance. Ignorance gets reduced through knowledge. But Donald Trump is uneducable. Donald Trump hears the phrase, most favored nation, has no idea what it means, throws it into a hallucination about drug prices, has no idea how they work, and thinks he's somehow doing Americans a favor by convincing the French president to raise the cost of drugs, which would in effect raise the cost of drugs around the world and raise the cost of drugs from what would have been a lower price for Americans.
What he said about drug prices sounds dramatic, but when you slow it down and look at it carefully, it doesn't make basic sense. If the price of something drops by 100%, that means it goes all the way down to zero. There is nothing below zero in normal pricing. You can't say a price dropped by 1,000% or 2,000% and expect that to mean anything real. That kind of language may sound powerful in a speech, but it doesn't follow simple arithmetic that every student learns in school. When people hear numbers that big, it creates the impression that something huge and historic has happened. But in reality, it is just exaggeration that doesn't line up with how prices work in the real world. This matters because when leaders talk about policies that affect millions of people, especially something as serious as the cost of medicine, the public deserves clarity, not confusion, created by oversized numbers and dramatic claims that fall apart under basic math. He often talked about something called a most favored nation plan for drug prices, presenting it as a breakthrough that would finally make Americans pay the lowest prices in the world for prescription drugs. The idea sounds simple and attractive. If another country is paying less for the same medicine, then the United States should pay that lower price too. That part of the idea is not crazy. In fact, it's a real policy concept that economists and policymakers have discussed for years, sometimes calling it international reference pricing. The problem is not with the concept itself, but with how it was described and what people were led to believe had already happened. The way it was presented made it seem like drug prices in America were about to collapse downward by huge amounts, as if a switch had been flipped and relief was already on the way for people struggling to afford their prescriptions. But for most Americans standing at a pharmacy counter, nothing changed. The prices they were asked to pay did not suddenly drop by 90%. They did not see a wave of cheaper medicine because of this announcement. He spoke as if there were already agreements in place with pharmaceutical companies, as if these companies had accepted a new system where Americans would be charged the lowest price found anywhere in the world. But no clear public evidence ever showed that such sweeping agreements existed in a way that changed what people actually paid. There were announcements, statements, executive orders, and plans discussed in speeches, but there was no widespread, visible result where drug prices across the country fell in a dramatic way. This created a gap between what was being said and what people were experiencing in their daily lives. When someone hears that prices are going to drop by staggering amounts, they expect to feel that change quickly. When that doesn't happen, confusion and skepticism grow. Part of the confusion comes from misunderstanding how the most favored nation idea is supposed to work. The basic logic is this: if France, Canada, or Germany pays $10 for a pill, and the United States pays $100 for the same pill, then the American price should come down to $10. That is the intended direction of the policy. The high price is supposed to fall to meet the low price. It is not supposed to work the other way around. It is not supposed to mean that France or Canada must raise their prices so that everyone is paying more. Yet, the way the idea was sometimes talked about made it sound as if convincing other countries to raise their prices was part of the plan. That is not how this kind of pricing model is meant to function. In reality, many countries already pay less for prescription drugs because their governments are directly involved in negotiating and controlling prices. In those places, the government often acts as the main buyer for the entire population. Because of that, drug companies cannot simply charge whatever they want. They have to sit down with government officials and agree on a price that the country is willing to pay. If the price is too high, the government may refuse to cover the drug, which means the company loses access to that entire market. This gives those governments strong bargaining power. They can say no. They can push for lower prices. That is one reason why people in those countries often pay less for the same medications. For many years, the United States did not use that same approach, especially when it came to Medicare. Medicare, which covers millions of older Americans, was not allowed to directly negotiate drug prices with pharmaceutical companies. This meant that the U.S. often ended up paying higher prices because the system relied more on market forces and private negotiations rather than centralized bargaining. So when someone says that Americans pay more than people in other countries, that part is generally true. The reason is tied to how the system is structured, not because Americans somehow need more expensive medicine. When the most favored nation idea was discussed, it tapped into a real frustration that many people feel. Why should Americans pay more for the same drugs? That question makes sense. But the way the solution was described often skipped over the complicated steps needed to actually make such a policy work. Changing drug pricing on a national level is not something that happens overnight with a speech or an announcement. It involves legal challenges, negotiations, rule changes, and often pushback from powerful industries that have a lot at stake. Even when executive orders were issued, they faced court challenges and delays. As a result, the dramatic change in prices that people were led to expect never materialized in a broad, noticeable way. Another layer to this issue is how pharmaceutical companies might respond if the United States truly forced prices down to match the lowest prices in the world. Economists have pointed out that companies might try to protect their profits by raising prices in other countries, refusing to sell at very low prices there, or delaying the introduction of new drugs in countries that demand very cheap rates. These are possible side effects that experts discuss. But those are reactions companies might choose. They are not the intended design of the policy. The purpose of the policy is to bring high prices down, not to push low prices up. Confusing these two ideas can make it seem like the whole plan works in reverse, which is not how it is supposed to function. The discussion also highlights a broader issue about how leaders communicate complex policies to the public. When explanations rely on huge, flashy numbers and bold claims, people may feel excited at first, but they are left without a clear understanding of what is actually happening. Saying prices will drop by 90% sounds impressive, but without a clear explanation of how, when, and for which drugs, it becomes more like a slogan than a plan. Over time, this can erode trust because people don't see the promised results in their own lives. At the heart of this issue is a real problem. Prescription drugs in the United States can be very expensive. Many people struggle to afford medications they need to stay healthy or even alive. That frustration is real and widespread. So when someone promises dramatic relief, people listen closely and hope for change. But real change requires careful policy work, negotiation, and implementation, not just powerful language. When the language gets ahead of the reality, disappointment follows. It is also important to understand that drug pricing is deeply tied to how healthcare systems are organized. In countries with national healthcare systems, the government has direct control over what is paid and can use that control to push prices down. In the United States, the system is more fragmented, with private insurers, government programs, and individuals all playing different roles. This makes it harder to apply a single rule across the board. A policy like Most Favored Nation would require major coordination and legal adjustments to fit into this complex structure. So when people heard that this plan was already in place and that prices were about to fall dramatically, it created an expectation that was not matched by reality. The idea itself was not meaningless, but the way it was described made it sound as if the problem had already been solved. In truth, the steps needed to make such a system work were still far from complete. The situation also shows how political speeches often mix real policy ideas with exaggeration to create a sense of victory. Saying that something is the biggest or best or will lead to staggering changes makes for powerful sound bites, but it doesn't always help people understand what is actually happening. When it comes to something as important as drug prices, clarity matters more than excitement. Many Americans may not follow the details of healthcare policy, but they understand when they go to the pharmacy and see the price on the screen. That is where policy becomes real. If that number doesn't change, then all the announcements in the world feel distant and abstract. That gap between words and everyday experience is what creates confusion and criticism. In the end, the real discussion is not about personal attacks or insults. It is about whether the explanation of the policy matched how the policy is supposed to work, and whether the results match the promises. The math exaggerations, the unclear descriptions of how other countries would be involved, and the lack of visible price drops all contributed to the sense that the message was stronger than the outcome. The Most Favored Nation idea points to a genuine concern about fairness in drug pricing, but it also shows how complicated it is to turn that concern into practical results. Without careful implementation and honest communication, people are left with bold claims that don't match what they see in their own lives. And when that happens, it becomes harder for them to trust future promises, even when those promises might be more realistic and achievable. So the core issue here is simple. Big numbers and dramatic claims may grab attention, but real change in drug pricing requires detailed policy work, clear explanations, and results that people can actually feel when they pay for their prescriptions. Without that,